Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of SRE 101, a podcast about all things infrastructure and reliability. My guest today is Karthik Kalyanaraman, the co-founder and CTO of Scale3 Labs. In the past, I have worked with Karthik, I've partied with Karthik, and I've hung out on the streets of New York with Karthik. So naturally, I'm very excited to also be doing a podcast with Karthik today. Karthik, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Raghav, for the quick introduction. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Sure. So let's start with some introductions. Tell us a bit about yourself, Karthik. What have you been up to?
Yeah, for sure. Currently I'm the co-founder and CTO of Scale3 Labs. We are an early stage Web3 observability company. It's been about 9 months since we started the company. Prior to Scale3, I was at Coinbase doing nodes infrastructure with you and some of our former colleagues. Some of them joined me at Scale3 right around the time when we raised some seed round of capital. So I was with Coinbase for close to a year. That was my initial stint with crypto and Web3. And before that, I have built products at a couple of startups. I have a total of about 7 or 8 years of industry experience, mostly as software engineer. I call myself a generalist, as in like I don't go deep into one layer or the other. So my knowledge of the entire industry starts from front end to anything down to the infrastructure level. But yeah, that's basically what have been up to in my life so far.
Well, and given that a lot of people from Coinbase have joined you guys, joined forces with you guys, I see a new PayPal mafia forming up over here, and I really hope to see that.
No, hopefully that happens for sure. But yeah, like all talented folks passionate about solving this deep problem of DevOps and observability in Web3, which is like still a category that's still forming, I would say. But we are all passionate to solve this problem space. So exciting times ahead.
I see a lot of terms being thrown around in the crypto ecosystem today, right? Blockchain, decentralization, these are generally understood by now, right? But what is Web3? Like, before we even dive into the reliability aspect of it, what is Web3? What is its relation to blockchain or crypto in general?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. There is blockchains, there is crypto, and there is Web3, right? So blockchain is fundamentally the technology as we all know it. It's a distributed ledger technology. Crypto is like a general term that's like nice for PR firms and all of that. And I still feel crypto is a bad terminology to use because crypto generally refers to cryptography and not like cryptocurrency, because it also gives a bad terminology for the industry, because the industry is built on transparency, and cryptocurrency sort of makes it look like it's somewhat like shady sort of a thing. But
Absolutely.
yeah, but coming to Web3, if you're old enough, you will realize that there was something called Web2, and then there was like Web1. So basically, Web1 was the initial internet, web pages, like static web pages, where it's only like read only. You cannot actually interact with a website. This was during the early years of the internet, like in the 90s, when everybody started using internet as like a plays like it's similar to how yellow pages were in the physical environment. They started using internet as a digital analogy to it, and they started putting up information on it. You can read information, but you cannot like write to the internet or like transfer information. That was the initial days. And
Right.
then like when Ajax, which was a technology, asynchronous JavaScript technology, when it was invented, immediately like people started realizing that you can use Ajax to basically make websites interactive.
Mm-hmm.
So you can read and write. Like you can go to google.com and like search for things. That became Web 2.0. So people started building applications instead of using it as yellow pages. So there was like Yelp, there's PayPal. All the early stage internet companies were formed because of Web 2.0. Like there was social media like LinkedIn, Facebook, and all of that, because all of a sudden you can not only just read, you can also like write. So that was the core thesis. And Web 3.0 is basically this using like replacing the backbone of internet with blockchain technology, right? So today, just to like take a step back, today, if you think about Web 2.0, you have like server and client, right? Like you have centralized
Yep.
server, centralized client, and anytime a user interacts, it's through the client and it goes to a centralized server. With Web
Exactly.
3.0, the way it works is like the backend is nothing but like a decentralized network. So it's not controlled by a individual entity or like a centralized player. So anybody can build clients on top of the blockchain network. So just to give you an example, you must have heard of OpenSea, which is like the marketplace for buying and selling NFTs,
Yep.
right? So there is OpenSea, but OpenSea is nothing but like a client on top of the Ethereum blockchain. So if today you want to go build a competitor to OpenSea,
Mm-hmm.
you can build a client, and if you connect your client to the Ethereum blockchain, you can see all the NFTs that you see on OpenSea, because all the data is public. It's on the blockchain. It's verifiable, and it's like think in Web 2.0. If let's say there is a server that's not owned by anybody, and anybody can like make API calls to the server, then anybody can build applications on top of it. Like two people can simultaneously build the same application in different ways and try to differentiate it using their creativity. And that's what like Web 3.0 is. So that's how I look at it.
So I get that Web3 introduces a totally different paradigm of application development, right? New workflows, new ways of developing and deploying, and even though ultimately the end user does not care about this, but somehow there's a fundamental difference behind the curtains. So how is DevOps and reliability going to be different in Web3 when we compare it to traditional centralized infrastructure? I mean, like, we have a very clear image of what centralized infra is and how we do operations over there. How do we make that more reliable through our current techniques of SLOs and SLIs? But how do we instill reliability, and how would a DevOps engineer operate in the world of Web3?
Yeah, that's a great question, and that's the question that we ask ourselves at Scale3 almost every day, right? So, um, the biggest difference I would say is on the backend side of things, because the backend is fundamentally changing in Web3. So in Web2, you have centralized servers and microservices and whatnot, which is all like self-contained within an organization. So you can assign teams for every microservice. You can basically control how you want to like build your CI/CD pipeline, what sort of DevOps or SRE principles that you want to like follow, like restarting and like basically like bringing down a server and restarting it every few days for the sake of security reasons. You can like add security layers on top of it. You can basically control the entire narrative there. You can automate a bunch of things. You can set it up in such a way so that you can release to production almost every minute or every second or something like that, right? So that's Web 2.0. But in Web 3.0, the biggest change is because now the backend is like a public good, and it's the blockchain networks, and it's not controlled by a single entity. Like if you go one level deeper, what is a network, right? What is a blockchain network? It is made up of individual nodes that are connected to each other. And what are nodes again? Nodes is nothing but a piece of software that's running on some computer, right? So and all these computers that are running this piece of software, like for instance, if it's Ethereum, the Ethereum software runs on every single node, and all these nodes know how to like talk to each other, peer with each other, and transfer and share information with each other. Now when your backend is completely replaced with something like this, then what does that mean for application development and application reliability? Obviously, because it's end of the day, it's again a software that's running on a piece of computer. It would need updates. It would need constant maintenance. The host on which the node is running, that host would need maintenance. There's going to be RAM, CPU, memory issues all the time. And you can probably, as a company or as an organization, you can run your own node, or you can rely on a node that's being run by someone else. But if you're relying on a node that's being run by someone else, what are the incentives for that node operator to make sure that node is kept up to date and it's running
Yeah,
and
I
it's
mean,
highly.
how would I even trust somebody else who's running my backend for me? So
Yeah, exactly, right. So when it comes to DevOps and SRE, that's where the biggest thing is. So this is primarily fundamentally on the infrastructure side of things. So most of it boils down to how reliable and how available your nodes are, and who builds the software for the node. Actually, it's built by the open source foundations. Like there's like Ethereum Foundation, there's Bitcoin Foundation, and so on for different layer one blockchains. And now you have this entire network run by a decentralized set of participants of the network.
Yeah.
So how do you coordinate, let's say, a node update across all the different participants along with the release schedule of a particular foundation? That's like not necessarily a technological issue, right? That's more of a people issue and coordination and collaboration issue than anything else, because you are operating outside the bounds of a centralized organization. So that's one of the aspects. And secondly, in Web 2.0, you have all the standardizations. Like if whether you are running a Apache server or you are running like a Node.js server, it's all down to like HTTP requests, and you have like standardized set of error codes and whatnot. But in Web3, if you're running Ethereum, and Ethereum has like a bunch of things that you would need to monitor, like block height, average gas used, and whatnot. That's exactly not the same thing if you're talking about like another layer one blockchain. That could have like additional parameters and variables that you need to care about, which don't even make any sense in Ethereum, right? So there is like lack of standardization. And if you're like building an application on Ethereum and building an application on, if you want to like port that application over to another L1 blockchain, it's like you're operating in a completely two different worlds. And because there is like lack of standardization, how does that all tie into monitoring and observability and DevOps in general? It's like you cannot build a standard solution for Web3, like DevOps solution for, and expect to like work for every different blockchain network out there, right? So that's like the major fundamental difference, I would say, in terms of the DevOps problem and observability problem in Web3. Obviously, this is like at the infrastructure level. There is also application level.
Of course,
in Web 2, you have tools like Sentry, Datadog, and whatnot for application performance monitoring, like request tracing, request logging, and whatnot. But in the case of Web3, every application is basically a smart contract that's like deployed on the blockchain. And how do you monitor those smart contracts? Like, what does monitoring even mean? Like, whenever a transaction happens, you want to get alerted on. Like, why do you want to get alerted on a transaction, right? So these are some of the fundamental questions that you need to like keep peeling that onion to build your own thesis and build a product around it. And that's how like fundamentally DevOps is different. But obviously, for a DevOps engineer coming from the Web 2 world to Web 3, a Web 3 product cannot run without some of the Web 2 things. Like front end, it's completely Web 2. Some of the microservices that you might use, those are Web 2, right? Like server deployment, running your node. You're running a node on either a public cloud, then it becomes Web 2, right? So those components are still there, but how do you like sort of straddle these two different worlds is the core problem that you need to think about when you're thinking about DevOps and Web3.
Yeah, and the way I see it, the biggest challenge I see for a DevOps or an SRE engineer coming from the world of Web 2 into Web 3, it's to strike a delicate balance, a balance between, what knowledge and wisdom should you bring from Web 2, which is going to be very important here, and what are the areas in which you have to keep an open mind, because you're no longer working with centralized servers. You're working with a totally different paradigm of application development. So yeah, and I think that is going to be the most interesting thing for an engineer entering this field today.
Yeah.
So Karthik, you're the CTO of Scale3. What does Scale3 do?
So Scale3, the way we think about it, Scale3 is we are building products and solutions for solving this observability problem in Web3. And to start with, we have started with building observability tooling layer for blockchain validators. So essentially, there are two kinds of, like I mentioned about nodes, there are two kinds of nodes. There's like validators and there's like full nodes. So full nodes are basically, think of full nodes as servers running on AWS, and you're using AWS for building applications. So full nodes are used by developers. And there are a lot of companies out there that provide like RPC as a service. So developers don't necessarily care about running their own full node. So that's one of the market that exists out there. But Scale3, what we are building is we are building observability solutions for validators. So validators are responsible for running a validator node as well as securing the blockchain. And for doing that, like for basically running a validator and securing the network, they also earn like a commission, like a fee for doing that thing. And people can basically stake tokens with validators. So in the case of proof of stake algorithms, the way it works is there's like a bunch of validators that make up the network, and every validator node has like a bunch of stake in it. And anytime the validator node goes down, or if the reliability is not up to the mark, the stake gets like slashed and it gets distributed across the network, and it happens automatically. So that's how the incentives are aligned between validators and people who stake with the validators. So one of the major things validators need on a day-to-day basis is to make sure they have all the tooling needed to observe their nodes and get alerted, and are able to like efficiently troubleshoot if any issues happen in their nodes. And we saw a severe need in that market, and it was like very underserved, and it was mostly one-off community tools built for different blockchains by the validators themselves. So we decided to like sort of build a tooling layer for that. So basically we provide monitoring, alerting, and logging for validators on a bunch of different blockchains, like layer one blockchains. And our overarching vision is to build the end-to-end observability layer for the entire Web3 infrastructure, starting from the application layer till the nodes and validator layer. So that's precisely what we are building at Scale3, and the journey we are on.
Oh, that sounds pretty interesting. So Web3, it's understood to be a nascent field right now. I would say pretty young still. We've seen some promising use cases, right? But it is still maturing. So I imagine there can be a lot more instability in the system. Like my production application will probably not be as reliable as if I deployed it on a centralized infrastructure as of today, right? So can you share any real world examples of how SRE principles or DevOps principles were applied to a Web3 project successfully?
Yeah, so I think there are several companies in the Web3 space that run nodes, right? There are exchanges where you need the transactions to be recorded on the blockchain. So in order for the transactions to be recorded on the blockchain, you need access to RPC nodes. So obviously exchanges run nodes. There are node as a service providers, which basically host nodes and provide the endpoints to developers for building applications on top. So essentially, one of the core things that you need when you're running a cluster of nodes across several different protocols is making sure your nodes infrastructure is up and running and reliable at all times. And and the way a lot of companies today do that is by marrying some of the tried and tested best practices of DevOps and SRD from the Web2 world, taking into consideration some of the additional variables that come into play in the case of Web3. So by that, what I mean is, for instance, obviously you can run your own node like an Ethereum node as a developer, but the analogy to that is running your own server and hosting it at your home if you're building like a web application, which does not make any sense, right? So companies run nodes, and they also like run it behind load balancers, and they provide you like they put a DNS server in front of it, and they provide like the URL to you. So to you as a developer, it may seem like you're getting an endpoint to a dedicated node, but that may not seem the case. Like most likely it's behind like a load balancer, and behind the load balancer there's like a bunch of nodes that are running, being managed in a cluster, maybe on Kubernetes or anything else, right? So and companies do like blue green deploys all the time on their nodes infrastructure, because like I said, because the software for these nodes are developed by open source foundations, you can get like hot fixes and patches, software updates and whatnot at any time, right? And there is like usually a DevOps team behind the nodes infrastructure at these companies, and they actively look out for new software updates, like mandatory software updates from open source foundations. And whenever that happens, you need to like quickly patch your entire infrastructure for that particular protocol. Otherwise, there could also be a scenario where your node falls behind the blockchain tip, and applications that are actively using the endpoints of these nodes, they may not be able to like continue to function, right? So what these companies generally do is they will look out for new updates and patches. It won't be akin to what the sophisticated CI/CD pipelines that we have in Web 2, but it will be somewhat like an automated system where you build a Docker image or whatever from the newly updated software release, and then like you do like a blue-green deployment, so that like without any downtime, it automatically brings up new nodes with the new software update, and brings down the old nodes gracefully, and the load balancer is automatically attached. Like the nodes are automatically attached to the load balancer, and it goes from there. On top of that, a lot of companies use Web2 monitoring solutions like Datadog and Grafana for building dashboarding on top of the nodes infrastructure. They use all the Web2 tools like the logging provided by Datadog or Grafana's Loki and whatnot. Some of the companies even use like Elastic and Kibana for their monitoring infrastructure. Even though it's not purpose built for Web3, you need like a shim layer between your infrastructure and the monitoring solution to basically instrument all the metrics that you can pull from the nodes to your monitoring infrastructure. In addition to that, the nice thing is the node software that's built by these open source foundation, by default they expose a Prometheus metrics endpoint, which is like kind of baked into the software itself. So you just put a Prometheus and Grafana layer on top of it, and you start getting all the metrics that you need. The only thing that you need to set up yourself is like the alerting and logging. You can either rotate logs locally with files, or you can set it up with like a logging solution that's available out there. But it's still like it's not fully streamlined. So like CI/CD does not make sense in Web3 because smart contracts are immutable. So what does it mean by continuous deployment? Because anytime you want to like deploy a new version of the software, then you need to like deploy a new smart contract. Like that's why you see like Uniswap has V1, V2, V3, and V4, and every year there is like a new version of Uniswap. And when something like that exists, CI/CD does not make a whole lot of sense, but maybe CI/CD looks completely different, right? So it's still evolving, but like people are still using some of the best practices in Web2 to like kind of adapt it to Web3 and go about it.
So I do see that, there are Web3 is, it seems like Web3 is going to take some good parts of Web2, and actually these are both, I see them working together instead of like, it's not that Web3 is going to totally replace Web2, but rather they're going to be working in synergies to like make the best of two worlds that come together. So that's going to be interesting. I'm actually excited to see how that plays out. So it is unique in some sense. Like I have not seen, crypto, aside from crypto, I've not seen any other industry like rise and fall so dramatically like we've seen in the past decade, I would say. So where is the industry headed, Karthik? Like the crypto industry, the Web3 industry, how do you think people will be interacting with all of it in, let's say, 5 years from now? I mean, like, I'm literally asking you, where do you see yourself in 5 years, like a typical interviewer? But that's what what I want to know is, I want to pick your brains on what's your opinion. Where is this industry heading actually?
Yeah, that's a very deep question, right? As always, you ask anyone in the Web3 industry who is like bullish on Web3, everybody, like there is a very good chance that each one of them have different answers to this question. I may not be able to like predict the future, but one thing that I do think, personally, I do think is needed, and that's where we might be headed towards, is like fundamentally redoing the underlying financial infrastructure that we have today, right? So
Mhm.
the first good use case for Web3 was money, right? So in the case of Web2, the first good use case was probably search or whatever. But in Web3, what is the first good use case that you got was money. And that's why like everything was around money. Like there was decentralized finance, there was tokens, and then when Ethereum launched, it became like programmable money, right? So if you think about the current financial landscape and how like the money transfers and all of that work over the internet, like if you take for example like PayPal or Paytm or UPI or anything, right? Underlying under the hood, it's all like some kind of a protocol or basically like an application on top of traditional financial systems. Like anytime you want to build like a fintech application, you are dealing with the APIs from banking partners or like different banks from the traditional world that is not built for scale and all of that. So you are dealing with a rudimentary set of technology, but at the same time you also need to like build it for scale. And that's why you see like a lot of opaque behaviors when it comes to money transfers and whatnot. You have like ACH in the US that takes like I think 1 or 2 days for the transfer to happen. And you have like different banks providing different ways to transfer money. So you are like kind of like spoiled for choice sort of a thing here. Like you don't know like what to use when. There's like Venmo, there's like Cash App, each one of them like trying to compete on the basis of cashbacks that they are offering and the partnerships that they are making with businesses and whatnot. But
Yeah.
under the hood, everything is built on top of the traditional financial infrastructure, and there is like a lot of room to optimize it and make it much better than what it is today. And it's like very hard to like basically go down to the deepest of the levels and like kind of like rebuild all of those moving pieces. And Web3 kind of solves that problem in a very nice and elegant fashion. But you might ask this question as to like what does how does it translate to better user experience, right? Like i'm
Exactly.
using
Yeah.
using PayPal now, I'm using Cash App, I'm using Paytm, everything works for me really well, I don't have any issues, right? So I think the biggest thing in my opinion is going to be that because of all the optimizations that Web3 is going to bring,
Hmm.
uh, for a end user, from a user experience point of view, there may not be like a fundamental difference between using Web2 and Web3, and that's like a huge win for Web3, I would say, because as a user you don't necessarily need to know about what technology your application is using. You don't really care about that as long as
Yep.
uh, the job that you hired that application for, like to transfer money from Europe to India or whatever, right? As long as that works, I'm all good, right? So whether you are doing it using Web2 or Web3, it doesn't really matter to me. But in the case of Web3, once we are able to like solve this fundamental problem and gain mass adoption with the financial industry, I think it's going to unlock a lot of optimizations, and that will basically lower the cost of doing money movement across the world. At the same time, it will also lower probably like one of the biggest issues with traditional finance today is chargebacks and fraud. Like even as early as 2 weeks ago, Stripe was dealing with a huge issue where there was this rogue user who was creating false transactions and creating chargebacks across all the users of Stripe, and it was like a big issue. Those kind of issues will get resolved automatically if you are using Web3 because it's all like transparent. So that's one thing. The second thing I think where we are headed towards is um, probably I think NFTs is still like going to be interesting because NFTs is nothing but like a way to like own a piece of digital something on the internet, right? So in the case of Web1, it was just read. In the case of Web2, it was read and write. And in the case of Web3, it's like read, write, and own. Obviously, there are like a lot of downsides to it, and the technology is still not fully built out. And for some of the fundamental moving pieces are still needs to be built out in order for NFTs to be in order for NFTs to get to mass adoption. But I think NFTs are slowly being used by creators for incentivizing their followers and their fans by giving them like a piece of whatever that they are creating. Like for instance, I read about some movie maker that was like putting the entire movie on an NFT so that their creators can be the fans of that movie maker can basically buy a piece of that movie, and that becomes like the production capital that they raise to like basically release that movie. And if the movie goes on to become big, obviously the value of those NFTs can go up, and they can like trade and sell it. They can get access to like special events for the movie screening and whatnot. It's all great on paper to hear, but some of these experiments are still being tried out by different people across the world. So maybe there is a slight bit of a chance where we will see a world where these novel ways to build audiences can start happening too. So these are the two different streams where I think everything is headed towards, but I could be completely wrong 1 year down. You never know.
That's why there are always predictions. What is the most creative way you've seen someone use the Web3?
Yeah, that's a good question. I've seen a lot of creative ways Web3 was used during the DeFi summer of 2021. But one thing that stands out to me is there was this auction held by Sotheby's in the US for the original copy of Constitution. For context here, Sotheby's, I think it's they do auctions for various different things in the US. They are like a big name for doing auctions, and they were auctioning the original written copy of Constitution of the US. And immediately there was like a mini group called as Constitution DAO that was formed, and they started. They opened up like a DAO, and they started pooling money together on the Ethereum blockchain, and people started contributing for the DAO, and the DAO's user base like quickly grew within like I think 4 or 5 days. I was even considering like donating money for that, and the whole idea was that everybody who was part of that DAO, if they end up buying the Constitution, they own like a piece of it, and it's like fully recorded on the blockchain, and you can like go verify it independently that you own a piece of this Constitution, the original copy of this Constitution. But towards the end of the week, it was like a huge heartbreak for the entire Constitution DAO. Like somebody like outbid them and bought the Constitution.
Oh,
And the funniest thing was because anytime you transfer tokens to a DAO, it happens on the Ethereum blockchain. You also pay like gas fee for transferring tokens. All the gas fee is lost. They promise they will refund all the money because it's recorded on the blockchain. You can verify that somebody transferred money to that DAO. So they started, I think, refunding all the money, but the gas fees.
but you do lose the transaction fee kind of. So
exactly. So you lose the gas fee that you use for transferring, as well as when you're refunding, the Constitution DAO creators have to like bear the gas fees or whatever. So essentially, a lot of money was lost in gas for nothing, right? So, but it was like nevertheless fun to watch, like a group coming together out of nowhere to do the like basically become like a potential winner of Constitution on the Sotheby's auction.
well, I don't mind owning a part of the US Constitution, so I definitely think that's very creative.
Yeah.
All right, then that was all for us. And Karthik, thank you so much for coming on our show.
Yeah, thank you so much for the opportunity. It was great chatting.